The incessant singing of birds from the early morning had become incredibly annoying. The man wanted to get up and chase them all away or turn up the music louder, just so he wouldn't hear their singing. John was angry because, for once, he had decided to sleep in for an extra hour, but the birds woke him up, stirring an uncontrollable rage within him. He hated birds because they were associated with his best days. He also hated himself for not finding the strength to do the right thing back then. However, who could say what the right thing was to do? Back then, it seemed right, but now he thought differently. He was younger then and didn't understand much. Now, he knew for sure that it was very difficult to correct past mistakes. Forced to get up, the man took a shower out of habit, prepared himself a cup of espresso, and while the coffee was cooling down, managed to change clothes. John did everything out of habit. All his actions were so repetitive that life resembled a series of gray weekdays that repeated themselves over and over again. It was more like Groundhog Day, as if he were stuck in a time loop and all the events in his life were painfully familiar. The man knew exactly how his day would go, but today was going to break his usual routine and knock John out of his rut. As usual, John left his car in the parking lot, straightened his jacket, and slowly walked towards the office building. Suddenly, a dirty boy flew out to meet him. Beggars never come so close to this place before because the business center was under guard. John began to look around because a 10-year-old child shouldn't ask for alms alone. But who can understand these cunning schemes? According to which beggars act, every time they come up with a new way to get more money from people? The man already wanted to bypass the boy, but he didn't allow himself to do so. The boy, almost throwing himself at John's feet, made John decide that if he gave the child a little, he would certainly leave him alone. He put his hands in his pockets, but there was no change or cash at all because the man was used to paying for everything with cards and only withdrew money in the most extreme cases. "I don't have any money. Go find another victim," John frowned, trying to push the boy away. But the boy didn't intend to give up. He looked at John with a pleading gaze and didn't dare say anything. The man began to lose patience. On the one hand, he wanted to help the child, as it was clear he was hungry and hadn't eaten properly for a long time, judging by the shabby clothes hanging on him like a skeleton. John spent a decent amount of money every month to help the needy, and he was never told where it was spent. And how can you trust this child? What if you give him money for food, and he will give it to someone else who exploits him? "Yo, my dad, help," the boy whispered. Confused for a moment, the man was stunned, lost for words, and didn't know what to do. But after thinking over the child's words again in his head, John laughed. "Dad? You probably mistook me for someone else, kid." To be honest, John had already gotten used to the fact that they were trying to impose other people's children on him. Everyone wanted to profit from someone else's misfortune, and John treated such statements with irony. Probably, the child was taught how to press on the pity of rich people, and not only pity. The kid threatened to name John Reynolds, because journalists could hide anywhere to get fresh gossip or a scandal, and right now, they were probably nearby, with their cameras ready. How much John hated the press. Okay, if they wrote news by fact, but no, they usually twisted everything and passed lies off as truth so skillfully that people began to believe them. "So, kid, you seem to be crossing all boundaries." John grabbed the boy by the hand and dragged him to the side. The man was scared enough to break something in him because the boy looked weak. However, the boy turned out to be tough, and when John took his hand, he put up good resistance. Curious looks were followed by John and the boy, and it made John uncomfortable. He feared that at any moment, the boy's mother would jump out of the bushes and start screaming that her child was being mistreated. He would have to pay a lot of money to silence them. John's head began to ache, his blood pressure rising from nervousness. Glaring at the boy, John retorted, "Who do you think I am? Your father? I don't have any children and never have." Of course, considering the wild life John had led at one time, he could have had a child, but it was unlikely that this boy was his illegitimate son. "Mom said," the boy stammered, digging his bony hands into his pockets, "that you're my dad. Did your mom tell you anything else? Like the fact that aliens are living in space, for example?" Look, The boy pulled a ring with jade out of his pocket and handed it to the shocked John. He would recognize this piece of jewelry even with his eyes closed, as he made it himself and gave it to his beloved girlfriend once. He learned to create jewelry from his grandfather when he was young, but when John moved to his father, he went wild, felt the taste of money, and lost his mind. He gave this ring to Lizzie before their separation, which was supposed to be short, but ended up lasting a lifetime. "Come with me," John said through clenched teeth, swallowing the lump in his throat and holding the ring the boy gave him. Of course, the man could have pretended that he didn't notice anything unusual, but it was just an ordinary piece of jewelry of which there are so many sold in underground passages. But he recognized it, and if this really was his son, his heart beat unevenly against his ribs. A heart arrhythmia is a bad sign at your age, John would have been told by a doctor, but John thought to himself that it would probably be better to have that very same arrhythmia at this second than such a release of adrenaline in his blood. He looked at the boy walking beside him and couldn't understand how one could receive a hello from the past after so many years. He parted ways with Lizzie almost 11 years ago. Of course, he often thought of her, but he would never have dared to return to her life again after succumbing to his father's influence, his desire for money, and betraying his love. The man hated the singing of the birds because it reminded him of her, of beautiful Lizzie, a beautiful girl with a light soul and a big, kind heart. They often spent time in nature, by the lake, on the patio of the house, walking through the forest, and listening to the singing of birds. And when Lizzie was no longer in John's life, he hated the chirping that cut deep into his soul where all feelings and memories were buried. On the way to his office, everyone kept staring at John and the boy with their mouths open, as if they had seen a miracle, and the man was angry and ready to cover everyone's eyes with tape. He didn't fully understand why he had gotten involved with the boy, but there was something about this situation that made him act this way and not otherwise. "Are you sure you're my son?" John asked, squinting slightly when he and the boy were in his office. "That's right. Mom showed me your pictures. She said that only you can help me. And what about your mom? Let's say it's true and you're my son. You're already a grown-up boy. Tell me, why did your mom keep silent all these years and not tell me anything?" She was probably scared. Didn't want to interfere in your life. But now a bad thing has happened. Mom was sent to prison. I need help. I'm not asking you for money. Help me get my mom out. She said I could ask you for shelter, so I wouldn't be taken into a children's home, but I don't need it. If I helped save my mom, I would go to the orphanage and go to jail for my mom. I want to save her. John slumped into his chair, his hair standing on end from what he had just heard. Lizzie had been imprisoned? They are always the exemplary girl who could never end up in prison. Had she changed so much in these years? It seemed like the boy standing in front of him was quite grown up. Although he may have spoken intelligently, he was still a kid whose eyes were filled with the strongest fear. "What's your name, kid?" John asked. "Ryan. Mom said that my dad wanted to name me. She never told me anything about you before. Never said where you disappeared to. And when the police came, she had no other choice. She handed me the ring and told me to try to find help from you since we have no one else. And I didn't want to go to an orphanage. It's not good there, and no one will help my mom then." What's your mom's name?" John was still trying to convince himself that this was not his son, despite the multitude of pieces of the same puzzle that were ready to fit into a common picture. "Lizzie. You know what her name is. The boyfriend, the mom, kept clippings from newspapers with your interviews. I didn't understand why she was collecting them all, but then it dawned on me. I don't know why she was afraid to tell me about you. I wouldn't have come without a reason like now. And why did they imprison your mom?" John continued to bombard the boy with questions, even though he knew he had to think about how he could help. "Our neighbor, Mrs. Garrison, was very sick. She helped us at one time like no one else. She sat with me while my mom was at work. She was like a grandmother to me. My mom worked in a hospital and had access to medicines that were very difficult to get. Mrs. Garrison had to wait until all the approvals were passed, but how much to wait if the poor old lady was dying of pain while she went through all the necessary commissions? Anyway, my mother decided to take some and then return it when Mrs. Garrison got her medicine. But they noticed it, and she was condemned, saying she should have waited, and they would have given it to her for free. One good thing, Mrs. Garrison was taken to the hospital. They took her under special care now. I don't know how to get my mother out. If I had the money to bribe whoever I had to. Oh, kid, John said, shaking his head. You're still too young to be giving bribes to anyone. But I'm a real man, Ryan protested. You shouldn't look at me for being a boy. I would do anything for my mother. Suddenly, it seemed to the man that he wasn't talking to a child currently, but a fully formed adult personality. The boy spoke just like an adult, although according to John's rough calculations, he was only 10 years old. Okay, let's think of something together to get your mom out of prison. They shouldn't have put her there for that. And if we have to, we'll give a bribe. I don't have any money, Ryan said, shaking his head. And the ring, my mom strictly forbade me from selling it just like that. She said that only if someone threatened my life, then you would refuse to help. But otherwise, she asked to keep the precious thing safe. John's heart tightened, and that nasty suffocating lump formed in his throat again. It was hard for the man to think about the past when he was so happy but left it all behind. How would his life have turned out now if he had chosen the woman he loved instead of the money back then? He probably would have worked somewhere in a company, or maybe become a farmer. Who knows? Now, you can't even guess how it could have been if. And Lizzie didn't forget about him. She kept his ring, so she loved him, not hated him. Or maybe it was the other way around. Perhaps she wanted to use it as a weapon against him one day and blame him for everything, saying everything she had kept inside for years. Summoning his secretary, John ordered her to get clothes and a meal for the boy as quickly as possible while he was in a meeting. He also strongly recommended that Ryan did not leave the office and warned the secretary that if he disappeared, the punishment would be severe. During the meeting, John couldn't stop thinking about Lizzie. She was always too kind and self-sacrificing, always doing so much more for others than she did for herself. She was a real angel and remained so. Deciding that he would pull Lizzie out at any cost, John was afraid to think about what would happen to them afterward. He didn't expect her to welcome him with open arms. He wanted to ask Ryan if his mother had raised him alone all these years and if she had a husband during that time. However, he felt that it would be shameful to ask a child such questions, even though Ryan tried to act grown-up and independent. After the meeting, John returned to the office to find that Ryan had already been fed. However, there was no smile on his face, only sadness because he missed his mother. They were each other's only family, even though his mother always considered him a child. Ryan tried to help her, and in the small country community where they were living, he always found a part-time job. Sometimes he bought her flowers or bought her chocolate to see her smile. Of course, she scolded him for being too young to earn money, but also praised him for his independence since she had no family to rely on. Most of all, she feared that he would be taken away and sent to an orphanage, so she tried to earn as much money as possible to pay off the debts she had gotten while Ryan was a baby and often sick. Lizzie did everything for her son, and Mrs. Garrison was the only person who helped. Ryan understood how difficult it was for his mother to take that step. She agonized over it for a long time, tormented by doubts, and he also knew that she had been set up. He saw in his mother's shocked face how surprised she was when the police told her how many ampoules of medicine she had taken. I only took one to help the elderly person. Why do I need so many? Mrs. Garrison would have been given it in a few days anyway, but she just couldn't suffer any more pain, Lizzie cried. Who knows, maybe you're selling them. In any case, you'll be imprisoned for a very long time for this. Ryan hid, trembling and afraid that he would be noticed before opening the door to the police. His mother gave him instructions on what to do if she was taken away. Now, the boy was deeply upset, afraid to even think about what would happen to his mother. Of course, she was afraid to take that step because of her son. She was afraid that he would be taken to an orphanage, but she couldn't leave the elderly woman to die in agony. She wanted to help her a little to ease her suffering. John caught a good acquaintance and asked him to gather information on where Lizzie was taken and how bad things were. While he tried to distract himself with work, he entirely ignored the presence of his son in the office. And why would he be sure he was his child? What if Lizzie gave birth to another man's child? But now, looking at the boy, John noticed a certain resemblance to himself in childhood. It was like looking at old photos in an album. Soon, the acquaintance called back and named a sum of money that would make the case go away. He managed to find out that the head of the clinic where Lizzie worked had long had a grudge against the woman and took advantage of her small mistake to get rid of this too righteous employee who always tried to achieve justice. Without hesitation, John transferred the necessary amount and began to get ready to go after Lizzie. By that time, clothes had been brought for Ryan, and the man ordered him to change. He paid no attention to the sideways glances of his subordinates. He decided that he would now take Lizzie from the detention center, take her and Ryan home, and that would be the end of the story with his newly found son. However, seeing the girl from his past, his head started spinning. The events that brought many pleasant and memorable moments came flooding into his mind, and it was difficult to cope with them. Lizzie hesitantly looked at John and said that she would thank him, but the man didn't need gratitude. The only thing he desperately wanted was to talk to Lizzie, and he begged her for it. Just one conversation. After bringing them home with the boy, John decided that Lizzie and her child would not live in this place. He wanted to take everything on himself and buy them a new home. The only thing left was to convince Lizzie to accept such an immodest gift without thinking that he was trying to redeem his sins. John was confident that he could do it, even if not right away. Lizzie told John that the head of the clinic had been after her for a long time, trying to seduce her despite having a wife and children. Of course, Lizzie refused, and the man promised to cruelly avenge her and hit her when she least expected it. I didn't steal any medicine. I got permission from him to take one ampoule, but it turned out to be a trap. I don't know what I would have done if not for you. You saved me and Ryan. Why didn't you tell me earlier that I had a child? John asked with hurt in his voice, even though he scolded himself afterward. After all, it didn't make sense for John to be angry at Lizzie. He was to blame for many things, including her not telling him the truth about their son. Lizzie was silent for a while as if trying to gather her thoughts and choose the right words. Then, she looked at John sadly. I tried. I found your address and came to tell you about the pregnancy, but your father kicked me out. He said you were getting married, and then the news of the wedding broke. What was I supposed to do? You didn't want to talk. You didn't tell me anything. You didn't even say that you were planning to marry someone else. It was a marriage of convenience. We divorced a few months after the merger of the companies. John tried to justify himself. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wish you could find it in your heart to give it to me, he added. My father didn't tell me about the child. I didn't know, John confessed. But that doesn't diminish my guilt, he said. John got up, said goodbye to Lizzie, and left, realizing that they both needed time. He had to come to terms with the fact that he had a son, and Lizzie had to think things over and decide whether she was ready to trust someone who had betrayed her once again. John knew that he would do everything now to make this woman happy, but he doubted that she would believe him again. The man started visiting his former girlfriend and son frequently, bringing gifts. One day, the boy invited him to have a serious conversation. Stop tormenting Mum, Ryan said. Thank you for your help, but you need to make up your mind. Either apologize to her properly and live together, or stop coming here for no reason. Mom cries secretly after your visits. She's still suffering. I can't bear to see her suffer. That's not why I came to you for help. John was proud of his son, who was smart and brave beyond his years, and he finally decided to talk to Lizzie. The woman found the strength to forgive the man and let go of all the resentment, stepping from the past into the present, across the huge chasm that had once separated them. Lizzie and her son moved into John's house. Ryan was transferred to a private school where he could develop all his abilities. Newspapers continued to write articles about the millionaire who adopted a homeless boy and acknowledged him as his son. Journalists tried to smear John on the orders of his competitors, but they didn't gain anything from it because the man didn't fall for the provocation. It used to matter to John's father what the journalists thought, but he had been dead for several years. One day, John decided to give an interview. He honestly discussed the wrong decisions he had made in the past and his mistakes, hoping that someone would follow his advice and not step on the rake that he had once stepped on. The head of the hospital where Lizzie worked was punished. John tried to make sure that the man regretted what he had done and remembered until the end of his days that such inhuman behavior was unacceptable. Mrs. Garrison spent the rest of her days in the best place where she was taken care of, and her painful sensations were relieved. Lizzie was grateful to John for taking care of that woman. She saw that the man had changed, and that's why she forgave him.